The cat didn't move when the wind howled through the broken window pane, just blinked once, slowly, like it had seen storms before and knew this one would pass too. Outside, the early spring rain tapped impatiently on the tin roof of the little house on Dunley Street, the sky swollen and gray as if it hadn't quite made peace with the season. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp wood, old dust, and something else. Something that had lived here before, but was gone now. The house had belonged to Evelyn's grandmother, who passed away the previous fall. She hadn't expected to inherit it. In truth, she hadn't expected to return to the town at all. But grief has a strange way of calling people back, to memories, to places they thought they'd left behind, to things left unfinished. Evelyn was 34 and 3 weeks post-divorce. She had arrived in March with nothing but 2 suitcases and a folded-up resignation letter she never quite got around to sending. The small ad agency she'd worked at in Chicago hadn't noticed her fading into the background these past few months anyway. She'd told people she came back to handle the estate. What she didn't say, what she couldn't quite admit yet, even to herself, was that she had nowhere else to go. The house was 2 stories, but only the top floor felt remotely livable. The basement, as she remembered it from childhood summers, was cold and perpetually damp, with concrete walls and a pull-chain light that flickered like it resented being disturbed. There was a single window down there, but years of grime had turned it into more of a foggy dream than a source of light. Her first night in the house, she didn't sleep well. Not because of fear. Evelyn wasn't afraid of creaks or settling wood, but because of the silence. Cities have a way of tucking you into bed with their constant hum. Out here, in the stillness of small-town Michigan, the quiet felt like a presence, like someone watching. It was on the second night that she heard it. A soft, padded thump from the basement, followed by the unmistakable clink of something being nudged. Metal, probably. She sat up in bed, not startled so much as confused. It didn't sound like a raccoon. It didn't sound like anything wild. It sounded deliberate. When she opened the basement door the next morning, she half expected to find the old furnace coughing out soot or a box of dishes fallen off a shelf. Instead, she found a pair of green eyes staring up at her from the shadows. The cat didn't run. It sat on the 3rd step from the bottom, half shadowed by the overhead beam, one paw tucked neatly under its body, the other pressed firmly on the cold concrete as if staking claim. Its fur was matted in places, a muddied mix of gray and black, and there was a thin, jagged scar running from its right ear down the side of its face. The eyes, though, those eyes were sharp, not feral, not panicked, just watchful. Evelyn didn't say anything. She just closed the door softly and went back upstairs. The shelter was 5 blocks away, tucked behind a laundromat and a church with a hand-painted sign. It smelled like bleach and dry kibble and was run by a woman named Marcy, who had been classmates with Evelyn back in 7th grade. They hadn't been close then, but grief levels people out, softens the awkwardness of reunions. "I don't remember seeing a gray tabby come in recently," Marcy said, tapping through her tablet. "But there's a few strays that hang around that part of town. Since old Mrs. Tollin passed. She used to leave food out for them every morning." Evelyn thought about the plastic bowl she'd found near the basement stairs, cracked down one side with a hardened ring of what looked like dry tuna at the bottom. "What do you want to do?" Marcy asked. "I can come by and try to trap it. Or you could..." you know. See if it wants to stay? Evelyn gave a tight smile. Let's give it a few days. That night, she left the basement door open and placed a small dish of fresh tuna on the landing. Not at the bottom, not all the way inside, just halfway, like an invitation. She didn't check it until morning. The food was gone. So was the cat. But 3 nights later, during a particularly heavy storm, she heard it again. That soft sound of weight shifting on the steps. She crept quietly down the hallway in her socks, avoiding the creaky floorboards out of instinct more than caution. The basement light flickered as she turned it on. The cat was curled on an old towel that had been draped over a laundry basket, looking like it had always belonged there. A pile of half-open moving boxes surrounded it like a fortress. Its ears perked, but it didn't move. Not even when she sat at the top of the stairs and said softly, "I guess this place is yours now." It blinked, slowly. That was the first time she named him. Not aloud, not yet. But in her head, she called him Oliver. She didn't know why. It just fit. Evelyn spent the next few days like she was walking around someone else's life. She unpacked her grandmother's china, mostly because she didn't know where else to put it. She dusted bookshelves, wrote long, unsent emails to her ex-husband, and stared out the kitchen window for long stretches of time, wondering if grief ever ends or just settles into your bones like cold air. Oliver came and went. Sometimes she'd hear him thumping around downstairs. Other times, she'd catch a glimpse of him disappearing around a corner. He never came upstairs, never scratched at doors or meowed for food. But somehow, he was always there when the rain came. The neighbors began to notice. "Thought I saw a cat in your window," said Mr. Browning, who lived 2 doors down and still mowed his lawn in perfect vertical stripes. "He yours?" "Not really," Evelyn replied. "Funny," he said. "That one used to sit on your grandma's porch all the time, like clockwork. She called him Soldier or something like that." Evelyn smiled politely but didn't respond. The basement had started to change, not in a dramatic way, nothing sudden or unsettling, just small things. The smell of mildew faded. The cold didn't bite quite as hard. The air felt less heavy, like someone had cracked a window no one knew was there. One night, just after midnight, Evelyn crept down with a flashlight and a blanket. Oliver was asleep again, this time inside an empty cardboard box labeled Xmas, lights/linens. She watched him for a moment, the rise and fall of his breathing so steady it made her chest ache in a way she couldn't explain. She didn't go back upstairs. Instead, she lay on the floor, blanket pulled over her, and listened to the rain hit the basement window like soft applause. That was the first night she slept through until morning. Evelyn didn't tell Marcy about the cat again, not because she forgot, but because it didn't feel like news anymore. It felt like part of the routine. She started buying food, first just the small cans, then a full bag of kibble. She set up a litter box in the corner of the laundry room and added a second towel beside the dryer. She told herself it was temporary, that Oliver would eventually leave, that she was just helping out a stray. But deep down, she already knew. Something had begun. She felt it the way people feel the coming of spring before the snow fully melts. In the stillness between storms, in the way the house no longer creaked with emptiness, but hummed with quiet presence. Oliver hadn't come upstairs yet. He still spent his time in the basement, among old memories and unopened boxes. But he was no longer a visitor. And neither, Evelyn realized one morning as she poured herself coffee and noticed a fresh paw print in the dust by the back door, was she. The first time Oliver touched her, it was accidental, or at least, that's what Evelyn told herself. It was early morning, the light barely beginning to thread its way through the cracks in the basement window. Evelyn had come downstairs quietly, barefoot and bundled in one of her grandmother's old sweaters that still smelled faintly of lavender and cedar. She sat on the lowest step of the staircase, knees pulled to her chest, sipping from a chipped mug of lukewarm coffee. She didn't expect anything from him, not movement, not affection, just company. Oliver was settled on a folded quilt beneath the shelves, paws tucked beneath him, his tail curled tightly along his side like a comma. He didn't look at her directly. He rarely did. But he wasn't hiding either. She talked to him sometimes when the silence got too thick. "Used to be that this house scared me as a kid," she said softly, not really expecting a response. "The basement especially. Felt like it was keeping secrets. Now I guess I'm the one hiding down here." A quiet clink echoed as Oliver shifted, his back paw brushing the leg of an old paint can. Evelyn watched his ears flick at her voice, subtle and dismissive. But then, after a moment, he did something that made her breath catch. He stretched, slowly, all four legs extending like he was unrolling himself. His claws made that gentle ticking sound on the concrete floor, click, click, before he crossed the few feet between them and sat near her left knee. Not touching, just near. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at the floor and felt something inside her chest loosen, just a little. It was a beginning. From that morning on, Oliver started to drift closer, never too close. He wasn't a lap cat, not the kind to beg for food or curl up in windowsills like a painting. He was a watcher, an observer, the kind of cat that moved like fog, there, then gone, and somehow always part of the room. But he started to follow her routine. When she swept the basement floor, he watched from the top of a pile of old pillows. When she opened the small, narrow windows for the first time in years to let in some April air, he sniffed the breeze like it was made of memory. When she cried quietly into a folded towel she pretended was for her allergies, he didn't leave the room. And when she finally brought a bowl of food downstairs and set it near the washer, he approached it only after she left. But every morning, it was empty. One afternoon in mid-April, Evelyn carried a small space heater into the basement. The old furnace was still working, but just barely, and she'd grown tired of layering 2 pairs of socks under her slippers. She set the heater down with a small grunt and flipped the switch. Oliver bolted at the sound, not out of fear, but like something deep in his muscles remembered what noise meant. He darted behind a stack of boxes and vanished from view. She sighed, crouching low. "It's okay," she murmured. "Just noise. No one's here but us." It took 10 minutes for him to come back, but when he did, he circled the heater slowly, cautious and low to the ground, as if trying to remember whether heat could be trusted. By nightfall, he was sleeping beside it. That was the first time Evelyn caught herself smiling without effort. She started talking to him more, not just in passing, but in conversations that felt like letters she never sent, unfolded pieces of a life she hadn't shared with anyone in months. "I almost had a kid," she said one evening, her voice catching on the edge of the word like a splinter. "We were trying for a while. That was before the silence started." Oliver didn't move, just watched her from the corner of the room, one paw draped lazily over the other. I never told my grandmother. She would have knitted 100 baby blankets and filled this place with rocking chairs. She laughed then, not because it was funny, but because the basement had grown too quiet again and the sound helped break it open. Oliver blinked, slow and deliberate, and shifted closer. The basement became something like neutral ground, less of a storage space and more of a quiet confession booth. The walls, once lined with cardboard boxes and old tools, now held signs of their new cohabitation: a small litter box, a shelf cleared off for food and water bowls, a fleece blanket that Evelyn kept folding and refolding, even though Oliver seemed indifferent to it. He never meowed. Not once. But sometimes he'd chirp, a short, questioning sound, like a door creaking open somewhere inside him. His presence had weight now. Evelyn found herself talking about him to Marcy when she ran into her at the post office. "I think he's adopted the place," she said. "Or you," Marcy replied, smiling. "Some cats pick you, you know, not the other way around." Evelyn thought about that later, as she watched Oliver bat gently at a spider crawling across the basement floor before letting it go unharmed. Maybe he had picked her. Or maybe they were just two things left behind, finding comfort in each other's quiet. Spring crept in with rain and the smell of turned soil. Evelyn started opening the windows upstairs during the day, letting the warm air push through the stale corners of the house. One morning, while folding laundry, she heard a noise she hadn't expected: a sharp, stuttering thud, 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 followed by a low growl. She rushed to the basement, heart suddenly hammering. Oliver was perched near the far wall, his tail flicking hard against the floor. A large black crow was flapping frantically against the inside of the dirty window, wings knocking into the frame like it had flown into a trap. Evelyn reached out slowly, unlocking the latch and pushing the pane open just enough for the bird to escape. It vanished into the air without looking back. Oliver didn't take his eyes off the window for a long time. Later that night, she found him sitting there again, watching the empty sky like it owed him something. She sat beside him, knees pulled up, and whispered, "Were you trying to protect me?" He didn't move, but he didn't leave either. May arrived like a sigh of relief. Green grass pushing through soil, neighbors planting geraniums, the high school track team running laps in the morning mist. Evelyn started thinking about jobs again. Maybe part-time, something local. She made a few calls, cleaned out the old office upstairs, made a list of things to fix before the summer heat rolled in. She noticed Oliver more now, not just in the basement, but in her thoughts. She caught herself buying his favorite kind of food, the chicken pate with the silver label, without even thinking. She rearranged boxes so he'd have more sleeping spots near the window. She even bought a small, round collar from the hardware store, though she hadn't put it on him yet. He was still shy about the stairs, still hadn't made it past the landing, until one Tuesday. She'd come home late from a coffee meeting with an old classmate. The sun had just dipped below the tree line, and the house was dark except for the dim kitchen light she always left on. As she opened the front door, Evelyn froze. There, sitting at the top of the basement stairs, was Oliver. Not curled or hiding, but upright, still, like a shadow carved from something older than time. Their eyes met, and for the first time, he came forward. Not fast, not like a pet greeting its owner, but with the measured calm of someone who had waited, watched, and decided something important. He brushed against her ankle as he passed. A single, slow gesture. She didn't speak. Instead, She bent down and gently ran her fingers across his back, surprised at how warm he was, how real. That night, he slept at the foot of her bed. The next morning, she woke to find him curled against her side. The quiet didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt full. For 3 weeks, Oliver made the upstairs his own, never all at once. He took the house the way someone enters a cold lake, step by cautious step, always ready to pull back. First, he slept at the foot of Evelyn's bed. Then by the bedroom window, curled on a folded bathrobe. A few days later, she caught him investigating the hallway closet, nose twitching at the smell of old winter boots and mothballs. He didn't follow her around exactly, but he showed up more, in the doorway of the kitchen while she washed dishes, in the living room near the space heater, watching the world through the front window like he was reading it. He seemed comfortable, settled. And then, without warning, he disappeared. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Evelyn had stepped out to meet with a realtor, just an informational meeting, nothing committed. The house was paid off, but she'd been weighing the idea of selling it and starting over somewhere new. Somewhere that didn't carry the weight of so many memories in the walls. She was gone for 2 hours. When she returned, the house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in weeks. At first, she didn't panic. Oliver had never been clingy. He could disappear into couch crevices or closet shadows without a sound. But after 10 minutes of calling and checking his usual spots, under the guest bed, behind the laundry room door, on top of the basement water heater, she started to feel that old pressure rise in her chest. She checked the basement again, then upstairs. The door was closed. The windows were locked. No sign of forced entry. No way for him to slip out. Unless... the back door. Her stomach dropped. She'd left it slightly ajar that morning while unloading groceries. Just a crack. Barely noticeable. But the breeze had a way of nudging things open in this house. Evelyn pulled it wider and stepped out into the backyard. It was overcast again, and the wind carried that faint, damp scent of wet bark and grass clippings. The gate was still closed. No tracks in the mud. No sign of fur on the patio stones. But he was gone. She spent the next 6 hours searching, walking the perimeter of the house, calling his name in a whisper that grew into something hoarse and cracked. She even knocked on a few neighbors' doors, something she never did, and asked awkwardly, "Have you seen a gray cat? Scar on his face, quiet?" They all shook their heads. "He used to come around with Mrs. Tolland's cats," one woman offered, "but I haven't seen him since last year." "Maybe he just went home," another man joked. Evelyn forced a smile and walked away. That night, she sat on the bottom basement step with a bowl of food at her feet, staring at the blanket where he used to sleep. She didn't cry. Not yet. She just sat still long after the light shut itself off. 2 days passed, then 4. On the 5th day, it rained. Hard. It was the kind of rain that came in sideways, angry, impatient, like it had something to prove. The gutters overflowed, the front walk turned to soup. Thunder rumbled low and constant, like a conversation between old gods. Evelyn stood at the window watching it, arms folded tightly around herself. The house felt bigger again. Not haunted, just hollow. She heard herself whisper it before she meant to. "Please come back." Something about the silence that followed made her legs move. She grabbed a flashlight and a hoodie, pulled on boots she hadn't worn since winter, and stepped out into the storm. She searched the alley behind the house first, then under the porch. She circled the shed twice and called his name like a prayer. like maybe he could hear her above the wind. She was almost ready to turn back when she heard it. A low, sharp cry, half growl, half mew, coming from beneath the deck boards. "Oliver," she whispered, crouching low. Another sound, closer this time, desperate. She dropped to her knees and lifted the edge of a warped plank. The space beneath was barely a foot high, dark and choked with dead leaves. And there he was, soaked, mud-streaked. One leg curled awkwardly under him,